What's up, YouTube? This is Dr. Emmanuel. Today we have a new topic, the neurotube defect. What is a neurotube defect? A neurotube defect is a birth defect that's commonly seen in a fetus. This defect occurs as a result of the neurotube not completely closing, because we've discussed many times about the neurotubes in the past classes, talking about the regionalization of the neurotube or the neurodevelopment, which is the origin of a neurotube. The neurotube is very, very important for the formation of the brain and the spinal cord. So, what happens if there is a defect in this neurotube? It doesn't close completely like it's supposed to and form every part of your central nervous system like it's supposed to. What's the main cause of neurotube defect? Neurotube defect can be as a result of vitamin B9 deficiency, and in some cases, in a minor level, vitamin B12 deficiency. Both are involved in a biochemical process, but more importantly is the vitamin B9 deficiency or the folic acid or folate deficiency. All the same. It's all the same. Other stuff that can lead to this are environmental factors or genetic factors. What are the common types of neurotube defects that you can see? Number one, you have the spina bifida occulta, you have anencephaly, and you have anencephaly, and also we have hydrocephaly. But which one are the most common one we see today? The spina bifida occulta and the anencephaly. So, with the neurotube defect comes the spinal and the cranial dystrophism. On the spinal dystrophism, what do we see? The spina bifida occulta, which I already mentioned before. Then also the myelomeningocele, and the myeloschisis. Under the cranial dystrophism, what do you see? For cranial dystrophism, you mostly see the anencephaly. These are the two most common form of defects you see under neurotube defect. So let's go into detail with the spina bifida occulta. The spina bifida occulta, that's an enclosed form of neurotube defect. What does that mean, enclosed form? It means that there is no herniation. The neurotissue does not herniate through the opening that's created at the lower part of the spine of the fetus. Let's say this is your spine from the neck all the way down. The lowest part of your spine in the baby, what happens is what? There's an opening. That's the best way I can explain it. There's an opening, but the spinal tissue or the neurotissues do not come out and be exposed to the environment. It's just open. All you see around there is probably a dimple or a tuft of hair. But the neurotissue and the dura mater that covers it, they are all still intact inside. All right? There is no herniation. That's why it's called closed neurotube defect. Now, when you go to the other types of the spinal neurotube defects or dystrophism, like the myelomeningocele, the meningocele, the myeloschisis, these are open form of neurotube defects. Let's start with meningocele. Meningocele, what does that mean? The meninx herniates through the opening at that same lower back. Remember, in spina bifida, there is no herniation. None of the neurotissue or the dura mater passes through the hole that's created at the lower back. But for meningocele, the meninx passes through the hole or is herniated through that hole. For myelomeningocele, myel, that's your spinal cord, that's your neurotissue. Mening, that's your meninx, the covering. Ocele, that's them passing through the hole. So what does this mean? That the spinal tissue, the meninx, all herniate through that hole at the lower back. That's the easiest way I can explain it for you to understand, so you don't forget it. Remember the difference: meningocele, myelomeningocele. Meningocele, only the meninx herniates. Myelomeningocele, the myel, which is spinal cord tissue or the neurotissue, and the meninx herniates through the opening or the cavity created at the lower back of the baby. All right. Remember that these are the two forms of common forms of open neural tube defect. So what's the next form of open neural tube defect? You have the myeloschisis. Myel, that's your neural tissue, schisis. How I remember it is in gastroenterology, there's something called gastrochesis. That's a situation whereby during the embryonic development of the baby, all the contents of the abdominal cavity comes to the outside. They herniates through to the outside. They did not all go inside and get enclosed. They all herniated to the outside, and there is no covering. So for myeloschisis, that's your neural tissue or your spinal tissue herniating through that cavity, that hole at the lower part of your spine, and there is no covering. That's an easy way to remember that. Remember, myeloschisis, neural tissue or spinal tissues, schisis, exposed or herniated without any covering. Remember that. So now let's go into the cranial dysraphism. Common one we talk about today in the society is anencephaly. You have other forms like hydrocephaly, iniencephaly, but commonly you have anencephaly. What does that word mean? Anencephaly. An means absent. Encephaly means brain. In this situation is mostly the forebrain. That's this frontal part. All of these are all of it. Your forebrain. Remember when we did the regionalization of the neurotube, we had the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain, which is behind. All right. The forebrain is mostly empty. All right. They call it, some book they said lesser amount of brain. But anencephaly simply means absence of the forebrain or absence of the brain. So what happens? All the fetus born with such condition most likely do not make it through life. Now, with the spinal bifida occulta, with the myelomeningocele, the meningocele, myeloschisis, they can make it through life. There can be some surgery done by the neurologists or the spinal surgeons. I would say the spinal surgeons or neurosurgeons to fix the situation. But when it comes to anencephaly, there is a high chance of them dying at birth. High chance of them dying at birth, stillbirth. So anencephaly is associated with absence of the forebrain. With that, what are the common things that you see in women during pregnancy? Their belly looks bigger than it's supposed to be, even though it's only one child. Why? Because they have a condition known as polyhydramnios. Polyhydramnios. I'm not saying that all pregnancies whereby the mother's belly is bigger than the gestational period means there's polyhydramnios from anencephaly. No. Bigger belly can be as a result of overweight baby. For mothers who have gestational diabetes, it can also be a situation of having two fetus in your womb or twins in the womb. But one of the main signs that you can see physically with your eyes looking at the mother is the belly looking bigger than it's supposed to be for the gestational term. So why is there polyhydramnios in this condition? It's because the baby does not have a forebrain. So if there's no forebrain, there is a high possibility of decreased swallowing reflex in the child. The child cannot be able to swallow the fluid.